sometimes you classify the cost income. Most of you will do by function. We have many departments, R&D, manufacturing, marketing, accounting, business. Of course, we will allocate costs based on income. That's very natural, but it's not useful. Why? Because when you sell the product, all of these are somehow the support. You want to know how much actually it costs to produce your items. So we have different ways. The main way that we use is we call elements. We will look at raw material, direct material, something that within the products. Direct labors, those employees who really relate to how to produce the items. And factory overhead. Anyone who in factory that help can be QC, can be forklift driver, can be someone else that relating to this. And of course, sometimes we will see that certain cost is direct, meaning that the more you produce, that cost increase over time. For indirect is some kind of fixed. It's not directly related to item of the products. It's sometimes the behavior is in the same. And we also look at the expense. The way that we look at product cost, the way that we look at our cost classification in this class, we look at this picture. Look at the product first. For the product, we think about as an input. This is raw material. Of course, you will have some labor, some kind of accessory. Through your process, you will get your finished good. This thing happen in factories. This thing happen in factories. Another thing that may relate to your product is happen in headquarters. For example, you may have personnel, marketing, sales, finance, support, store, or even sometimes ERP, transportation. In order to get products, this is what we call product cost. And anything else we consider it to be as period cost. In managerial accounting, these two costs are kind of different. Any product cost, when you manufacturing, it will become inventory. You will acknowledge all these costs when you sell product. Remember, when we look at profit and loss, we have one item called cost of goods sold. This is product cost. But for period cost, whenever you pay the money, you have to record immediately. This is your expense. This is your factory overhead. This is your SGA. They are related. How we classify costs and how we report is somehow related. But anyways, key point for this slide and for the future is for the purpose of understanding, we classify costs as direct material, direct labor, and factory overhead. This is within the boundary of when you manufacture things. Other costs, transportation, marketing, sales, headquarters, your profit will be period cost, not incurring things. For some reasons, if we combine DM and DL together, we call this prime cost. This is the main cost when we manufacture item. And prime cost usually cannot be reduced. This is basically the minimum cost when you manufacture anything. The reason that we cannot reduce this is, think about material. When you want to manufacture anything, this is the minimum item, raw material that required to produce it. And since your process also define in advance, labor that involved depending on your machine. These two costs usually cannot be easily reduced. That's why we call it prime cost. The only thing that we can influence is manufacturing overhead. Something that every product use in common. And another part is if you combine direct labor and factory overhead together, we call this conversion cost. This is the cost that we transfer from raw material into finished good. This is how we define cost. It can be, of course, we define it as product cost, DM plus DL plus factory overhead, but somehow we can group differently based on your purpose. And of course, the plant cost and conversion cost will be something that gonna be appear in your exam to confuse you guys. There's no any purpose besides the reason we call this two is for the purpose of exam to confuse anyone who not be. Now, what I want to mention is that plant cost is just DM plus DL. Conversion cost is DL plus factory overhead. And I should mention that prime cost and conversion cost, this is British concept. Somehow you will see this only was mentioned in UK textbooks only. But for US, we use both this. There's some kind of meaning, but not really significant. For factory overhead, I should mention that if you work in factory and if you see the proportion, you will notice that most of the cost that you can classify is actually the factory overhead. In my companies, that even we do just OEM for Nikes, this factory overhead is 30%. For small and medium company, this can be up to 70%. So if you are small, high proportions of your cost will be factory overhead. Therefore, there's an incentive to divide it further into indirect material, indirect labor, and miscellaneous. Let me show you an example of indirect material. For example, box, shrink wrap, stationaries that we use in factory. All these are indirect. The reason that is called indirect is because it's too small, it's too trivial. We don't want to trace it. The only reason here is that the indirect material and indirect, the key difference is direct is easy to trace. Once you know that you produce X quantity of product, you know that it's going to be 3x quantity of direct material. That's it. In proportion to what you produce. But for indirect, it's maybe trivial. So trivial that you don't want to detect it. Another example is can be sticker label. Another thing, some kind of manual equipment. Anything that is used to complete your product, but is not difficult to trace. Similar to indirect labor, is certain labor that you use in your factory, but too trivial or used in many products. Example of that is QC, transportation within your factories, supervisors, salary of your factory managers, other teams, janitors. This is all the cost that is difficult to track. And sometimes we have other things like phone bill, utilities, rent and maintenance. These are all small things. And all this is, of course, when you classify this, any company can do whatever you like. Strange thing about measure accounting is the concept is very simple, but when you do it, it totally depending on the situation. If you want to be more detailed, it takes a lot of effort. Through the example, you will see that. And to motivate you, let's look at the water that you have. I have certain video I would like to show you so that you can see different perspectives.
Welcome to Supply Chain Management. Now I know most of you spend your childhood evenings dreaming of taking your first supply chain management course. But for those handful of you who might not know what supply chain management is, let me provide you a brief explanation. Let's take a simple product, like a bottle of water. Clean water, a plastic bottle, a plastic cap, and a label. Buying them at the store or vending machine might cost you about $1.50. How much of that do you think is profit? Nope. Wrong. Wrong again. Now what? Water. A plastic bottle and a label. That couldn't cost more than 50 cents. And if you buy them in bulk, how could each bottle not give you at least $1 in profit? Seriously. If you think you can make $1 per bottle, you should drop out of college right now and get into the bottled water business. You see, this right here illustrates one of the most common consumer misconceptions. Product cost is not equal to material cost. And in business, you don't have the luxury of thinking only as a consumer. You need to think like a business executive. Or better yet, an entrepreneur. So, in order to figure out where all that profit went, we need to imagine what it took for that bottle of water to get into your hands. First, you need to negotiate the purchase of the empty bottles and caps. Those bottles will be much easier to transport if they're in boxes. We'll need to shrink wrap those bottles so they don't fall out of the box. We can move a whole lot of boxes quickly if they're all put on pallets. In order to move the pallets, you'll need a forklift, which means you'll need a forklift driver. That forklift will then take the pallet and put it into a truck, which will require a truck, driver, fuel, and insurance. Also, you'll need a label for that bottle of water. Therefore, you need to design a label, print the label, and get the label shipped to the plant. Another truck, driver, more fuel, and insurance. Our water bottling plant won't be free, and neither will the energy it uses. In our bottling plant, we'll have employees and bottling machines, and let's not forget the day-to-day items like light bulbs, garbage bags, machine parts, janitorial supplies, toilet paper, and anything else that would be used at the plant by the employees. Oh yeah, and we'll also need access to the drinking water. Machines will then purify the water. Other machines will bottle the water and affix the labels to the bottles. And still, another set of machines will box, shrink wrap, and then palletize the bottles. In order to move those pallets, again, you'll need a forklift, which means we'll need another forklift driver. That forklift will then take the pallets and put them into trucks, headed to the distribution center. And, as we've seen, those trucks will require drivers, fuel, and insurance. Those distribution centers will also require employees, forklifts, and energy. From the distribution center, they'll head out to retail stores on still another truck, which will require a driver, fuel, and insurance. That store will need employees to unload the truck, stock the bottles of water on the shelf or refrigerator. If you have a refrigerator, you'll of course need energy. If we want to secure our stock, we may get a security guard or a security system. And of course, the store will likely get insurance. Also, imagine the costs associated with returning and replacing bottles that are damaged. Oh, and for some reason, even bottles of water sometimes have 1-800 numbers, which means you'll need a staff call center to answer the customer's questions about your bottle of water. Wow! All those materials, boxes, people, machines, buildings, energy, fuel, and vehicles, they cost money. Those things weren't free, and they probably weren't used efficiently, and it's likely that several bottles didn't survive the journey to the consumer. Oh, and by the way, the employees at the water company, you know, the ones that work in finance, accounting, marketing, human resources, and IT, they want a paycheck too. So, through that simple example,
you can access the video, of if you go to playlist, I already list the video that relating to the class as well. You can access this one if you want to look at it as is the supply chain. I use this video for the class to illustrate what are the costs that you probably never realize that when we want to produce the bottle of waters, what are the costs? And my question is that based on the video, based on what you're understanding, I have certain questions. What are the materials? Look at bottle of water. What are the materials?
Plastic.
Plastic. Mean bottle, right? What else? No, not material. That is material.
The tap water.
The caps, water,
Label.
and label. Yes. Basically, direct material is if you look at the product, what you see is direct material. Direct material. Are you with me? The concept of direct material is simple. Look at the products. Look at the finished good. Whatever it is, that direct material. Plus, certain material that you use in process may disappear when you have complete product. You should include that material as well. But for every bottle that you produce, remember all this will be the ratio with the item you produce. That's definition of direct material. For example, certain items, light bulb, in order to manufacturing, you require certain like the mold to produce it. And during the process, the metal mold will be disappear, will be liquefied, that disappear. But that's a part of the material because of every light bottle require one to produce it. Now, what about the net labels? Only direct label here is operators. At plant, at machine. This is the only one who actually relate to manufacturing. The rest that you see, people in factory, this is factory over here. You can divide it further that of course we would have stationery and indirect material. For example, stationery, bags, carton, so on and so forth. This is indirect because we don't really care about it. If you care, of course, you can say that carton could be direct material as well, if you care. Example of that, think about your luxury watch, Rolex. Of course, if you have Rolex, you probably notice that they have very nice box, 9% presentation. It's gonna cost you, let's say that around 1,000 or 2,000 baht to produce, manufacturing such a box. Therefore, in terms of perspective, yes, we should think about it as direct material. Depending on situation, the material accounting concept is kind of flexible. Depending on your situation, depending on your analysis, things could move different from different categories. Of course, we will have indirect labor as well. This would be QC, forklift driver, forklift truck drivers, factory managers. So so on and so forth. What I want to highlight is that DMDL and factory overhead scope is within factory. From the video clip, you probably heard something from the corporate sides: transportation, insurance, finance, marketing. These are SGA, sales and general admin. This cost happen in headquarters. This is our classical way when we define the cost in when we have manufacturing. We divide into 4 categories. Another thing is to highlight is that how about depreciation? All the machine that you see in factory, of course, you know that there's a depreciation. Right? Depreciation happens in here. Any machines that used in factory, of course, we have to allocate the cost as well. Depreciation of machine in factory will be in miscellaneous. Each department, of course, have to absorb certain costs as well. For cars, for example, trucks, computers, then there will be depreciation as well, but in headquarters side, as the headquarters part. Are you with me? So what I want to highlight is that underlying managerial accounting, first lesson that you need to learn is that we do classification, cost classification. And the way that we do classification, first of all, we divide scope between manufacturing side and sales side. The reason that we divide like this is because when you sell the products, you have to at least the price that you're gonna sell is have to cover all the manufacturing costs. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. So that's the first part. And the rest is, of course, if the situation is bad, you can make discount, right? You can do discount, but you should aware of what is the cost to manufacturing your item. First of all, the period cost is part that you see. Group this together. This is what we call product cost. The rest that you see here is period cost. The way that we define. All product costs will become your finished good. This is when you want to list inventory. All this together will be your inventory. This is how inventory appears. What is the value of your inventory based on this cost? So, from this example, I hope that first of all you can classify costs relating to manufacturing accounting. Then look at examples. This is the example, the real examples. Since you are from admin, all the components in the car need to be painted. And when we paint for the industrial product, we use industrial scale. We not talk about just a spray. We talk about industrial scale. And this is example of industrial scale paint. You can see that there's a lot of items. You can, if you follow step from 1 to 6, this is a conveyor belt. Overhead conveyor belt that can hang the product and move product across the plant in order to paint. We begin at the first step. First, number 1 is when you start to hang the item. When you hang the item, of course, item will connect to the overhead conveyors, and along the conveyors, we will have electrical charge. For the item, we will charge with the negative one. And when you go to the second station, At this station, the paint, which is the powders, and charged with positive charge, will be blown up and cover your component. And then move to the oven. This is big oven rooms that once you pass it, it will bake and paint. Hopefully it stick with your components. And of course, certain parts have some kind of nook, cram a lot of areas, and it may have to be painted manually at station 4. And go back to the oven again. And then at the end is go to number 6 station and we move. This is industrial scale painting. And of course, in this situation, the concept actually comes from one of my students. He studied bachelor here and master here as well. When he graduated, he decided he wanted to continue his family business. His business is basically do a paint shop, but do industrial scale. And of course, he provide me with the data and situation. And overall, this is how the thing work. Now, let me put some kind of trivial thing, spinning off anything. What you're gonna see over here is not the real cost, but just make up one. Here's a situation. The first paragraph remains the same. When he want to chart, let me explain the situation first. He come visit me. He came visit me 2 years ago and discussed this problem because he is some kind of the service, the outsourcing of the other companies. When he see the item, he have to decide how much he gonna charge for this item to do paint. Question is that the product is not gonna repeat itself. It change over time. The process remain the same. What he charge, of course, depending on number of paint that he has to paint, number of colors that he paint, the size of the product, the number of nook and cramps that they have, and essentially what kind of surface it is. Is it easy to stick or do they have to repaint many times? And what kind of paint they use? This is, of course, this is the real cost related to the paint. Question that he asked is that all this, of course, very difficult to calculate how to calculate actual cost. He needs some way to calculate the cost very quickly. What his dad did in the past to calculate the cost is very simple, by weight. Depending on the weight of the items, this is how much you're going to charge. And you probably see that if you look at the real cost, this doesn't make any sense. So we have to come up with different ways to simplify how to calculate. That captures the real cost without complicating things. Now, what we come up with is, of course, category of the product. If product is small, the cost can be higher. If product is large, the cost is much more lower. And depending on how many turns, what the shape of the product, what is material product, the rate gonna be different. The reason that we do this is because otherwise, if you cannot charge, you cannot tell the price beforehand. You are due because once you pay, you have to sell it. So this is the situation. And in this paint shop, around 75% is factory overhead. Interesting enough, 75% is factory overhead. You cannot classify it because only things that you know is directly material, which is paint. The rest is factory overhead. So it's very important for him to make sure what is the minimum order so that the business can continue. Now, what I'm going to show next is my makeup story. This is made up story. I give you a situation, and you should come up with what do you think about direct material, direct labor, and people. Now, let's say that in this situation, the paint costs you $16 per gallon, and the paint shop requires setup times $500 per setup. And each time that they work at the end of the shift, they have to clean everything. So $500 here is include that as well. Using the machine will cost you $50 per hour. And this include electricity, this include gas in the oven as well. And require the technician. The wage of technician is $20 per hour to operate. This is general information that they come up with, that I come up with. And for particular days, for particular item components, we have 4,000 pieces of the same component. And we require 10 gallons of paint, 8 hours of painting machine, and 40 cartons of box to pack it. And the cartons cost you $40 for 40 box. If on average monthly admin and utility of this paint shop is $3,600, can you classify BM, DL, and factory rate? Before you go further, this example is kind of special. The reason it's special is I do slightly different way than what I typically do. What I want to highlight in this example is material accounting. You can do whatever you like. What happened is, for DM, of course, paint definitely be your direct material, right? What about box, carton? In the real practical factory situation, we're not going to track how many cartons that you use for this work. But in this case, the thing that you see in red is that usually is factory overhead, but for this example, I decide to be direct material. If you ask me, is it possible? It's possible. Is it practical? No. This is another example to trick those who are not in the class. What you see in red over here is not practical in the real world. But for the purpose of example, if you look at only single product, if you have perfect information technology, of course you can track that. Therefore, it makes sense to include it in direct material, in direct labor. If you work in perfect words, it's possible. But in typical, you don't really count how many cartons you use. And in one day, of course, you paint many products. This is not going to be practical, but for the purpose of this question, yes, I can check. Because in this situation, for one day, we do only one product. Therefore, if you combine paint and carton together, you will get 60. This is the price per paint, per gallon of paint, plus $40 or $200. If you divide by number of pieces, you got around 0.05. For labors, of course, for the admin, for the technician, of course, this is direct labor. What strange here is, of course, machine. Usually machines, the cost of running machine. Since one machine, during the day, you can have many models to run. Of course, it's typically we not consider this as direct labor in traditional sense. In practical, we don't do it. But for this, situations. You can do it. Assume that you have perfect information. Then you have, for the technician, 0.4 dollar per piece, and for the machine, 0.1. What about factory overhead? How you calculate factory overhead? Is there any cost that you forgot? Set up cost. What about the admin and utilities? And this, of course, admin has to be in factory. Now, you got 500, which is normal. What about 120? In the question, you never see 120s. But if you assume that you work 30 days, you can divide by 3,600 divided by 30, and you get admin 120s. What I want to show you in this example is that, first of all, major accounting, you can classify costs, whatever you want. Depending on situation, depending on your analysis. What you cannot do is that you cannot say that paint is BL. You cannot say that labor is direct material. You cannot say that the indirect, the setup cost is DM or BL. There are certain rules that you cannot do because it's going to make things confused. But other things, depending on how much you want to trace the process, you can do it. An example of that, of course, in terms of the box of luxury items. It's quite expensive, right? Therefore, that trace this item. And this is why this topic is kind of simple and difficult at the same time. It could simple because any cost that you not really care, you just combine them together and divide by number of products that you produce. Simple. But if you really trace it, you can see that the cost is kind of difficult to trace. And this situation is makes sense because if you look at paint and labor only, you will see that it costs very insignificant. Therefore, there's an incentive to trace other things in order to make sure that proportion between DM, DL, and factory overhead makes sense. If the DM is only like 5%, you probably ignore it, right? So therefore, we have to find possibility of other DM so that the proportion makes sense. Now, let me conclude these topics. We are now dealing with nature accounting. There's no regulations. You can do whatever you like, as long as it's not violate key assumption. Key assumption in this case is that DM have to be material, DL have to be labor, and factory overhead, DM, DL, and factory overhead must be occur in factory. These are key assumptions. The rest, of course, depending on your situation, depending on your analysis. And this is the reason why engineer who understand process is a good position to do this kind of things. Because depending on what you want to analyze, you're gonna change the situation, change the cost depending on what you want to do. So basically I have blank canvas, empty canvas. You can paint as long as you use green for trees and blue for sky. Basically, that's how this topic is. The rest you can do. You can do rainbow, of course. Now, let me look at other ways. This topic has two layers. First of all, first layer is basic. You understand what it is. It sounds simple. You look at when you look at the real data, your assumption will change based on how good of your data. You have to adjust your assumption based on your question, based on your analysis. You may have to adjust certain things in open canvas. Since I have a little bit of time, so we will repeat this part. This is the fourth topic. This is what we call CVP analysis, or cost volume profit analysis. In the old books, we call this break-even point analysis. In this situation, of course, as an engineer, you have to understand that whenever you manufacturing things, you have minimum of items that you have to manufacture. If anything go below this, you cannot pay for the cost. That's the situation. This analysis will help you to tell the marketing that this is the minimum quality. If you produce below this, company will lose money. And another thing that I should highlight is that since you already study marketing, right? Marketing or marketer have one potential, one tendency that going to happen is that they're going to sell the item for everyone. When they want to sell item for everyone, they're going to have many specifications, many colors, many specs for every market. And of course, one of marketing concept is they want to reduce that size as minimum as possible. This analysis will tell you that, of course, we love to do that, but we cannot. We have minimum quality that you have to manufacture before things go on. The analysis based on simple equation, profit equal to the revenue plus cost. And for the revenue, we consider that we have selling price times quantities. And for the cost, we have unit cost times quality and minus fixed cost. We assume that quality that we produce and quality that sell equal. Therefore, we can remove quality. And the analysis look at the situation when we make zero profit. Not make any profit, but not make any loss. Question is that how many quantity required in order to cover the cost. This is the idea behind the analysis. It's quite simple. How much quantity that you need to produce in order for the marginal cost to cover the cost. And in this case, you probably see that we have variable cost, we have fixed cost, and it's up to you to define what is variable cost would be. Variable cost, of course, this is going to be constant cost for every unit that you produce. And for the fixed cost, this is charge and related to the level that you produce. Here's a sad part. In the real world, we operate in range, meaning depending on number of quantity you produce. Of course, sometimes you change the technologies, you require different variable costs and fixed costs. Think about if you want to produce large quantity of water bottle, you probably have to buy a large machine, right? And that's gonna have high fixed costs. But key benefit is unit cost gonna reduce. But if you not decide to not buy anything, if you do it by hand manually, it's possible. You have low fixed costs but high unit costs. So this is kind of depend on quantities. And another term for that, sometimes we call it this range of relevant range. We use this analysis based on key assumption that you're gonna produce within certain range. Beyond certain range, things could be different. For example, think about the item that you purchase. If you purchase only one item, it costs you X. How about if you purchase 1,000 of the same item? It's gonna probably cost you less than 1,000 units. This is what we call economy of scale, and the analysis assume that we don't have a net effect. We analyze within certain range. And the analysis of this case, of course, gonna be, we have many examples for that because the rest is just basic calculation. Things, I will recap this next time. And I will go through all this in the next class, including budgeting and variance. Any questions right now? I probably need to stop it here because one of the most difficult example is here. So this example, you can see that we do material accounting, right? But you can see that the term that we discussed, EBITDA, will surface. You can use this analysis for financial accounting as well. So I will stop here and make sure that you understand key concepts. I would say that my exam will have, let's say, the key concept part and application part. That's it for today.